Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session on our favorite questions from the forum. I'm Jim.
And I'm Diego.
Yeah, and we're going to present to you our favorite questions that we actually got out on the forum. But before we do that, Diego and I know a whole lot about Tableau, but we don't know anything about financial investing. So don't take anything we say and make an investment decision based on that. My name is Jim Dater. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And some of you know me from working with the newbie group or, from being out on the forum. I have 4 grandchildren. 3 of them live in Nashville, and that's kind of why we live in Nashville. And my youngest granddaughter lives in Atlanta. And I do enjoy cooking. Diego, how about you?
Well, I am also a 3 times Tableau Visionary. I live in Colombia, South America. Well, my inspiration is my family, my wife, my cats. As you can see, I have 2 cats. White one is Mia, the other one, the black one is Milo. I also love to travel and carry my t-shirts to everywhere. So as you see, I have Destination Data Hero, and the Data Rockstar t-shirts. So it's wonderful to carry on also in my luggage the t-shirts. So let's begin. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to share with you some actual questions that we got. We're going to share our 10 favorites. I've got 5. Diego's got 5. These are actual questions that came in, and we're going to share with you the answers. And the first one we want to start with is a question that we see. We probably see this question every day. It's how to do a year-over-year analysis or a year-to-date analysis. And in this case, our user has filtered the date to the last year. And he came back and he said, I'm not getting any results. What did I do wrong? Well, his data started out, it looked like this. You can see he's got data from 20 through 22, and he did a table calculation to get the year-over-year growth rates, and then he filtered it. He took out 2020, 2021, and he said, I didn't get any results. Well, of course he's not going to get any results. He filtered out data for 20 and 21, and that data is no longer in the data set. It's not there, so you can't do a year-over-year analysis based on data that's no longer there. What he really should have done, and I'm going to show you a couple of calculations here. He can calculate the current year, to date, based on his start date and his end date. Now, that's data that he provided to us. He gave us a start date and an end date, and all this calculation does is it takes a look at a field that he's got called new date, and see that it's less than the end date and it's greater than the start date. And if that's the case, he records the sales, and we can put that in right here. And for the prior year calculation, all we do is we use that same calculation and we use date add to look at last year. We look at the year of the end date minus 1, the year of the start date minus 1, and the values in there, then we record the sales on that. And we now have the current year and the prior year, and the difference, the percent difference, is nothing more than the current year minus the prior year divided by the prior year. You have to remember, when you filter data out of the data set, each worksheet has its own data set. When you filter data out of the data set, it's no longer available for your analysis. Diego, how about you?
Oh, what a wonderful example, Jim. So, wonderful. This is the question number 2. It's about how to use Tableau user filters in post metrics. This guy has a question, a very interesting question, when he has a published data source from Tableau Prep, and he wanted to include the user filters in the Tableau post metrics. Well, he tried doing an advanced metric definition and using user filtering the advanced metric definition, but he wasn't able to. So what is really interesting here is that Tableau pools will respect the user filters, but that those user filters should be included in the data source. Yes, in the published data source, not in the metric definition. So in this case, what I recommend this guy was to go to their data source, the published data source. In this case, as you can see, we have here a publish by a flow data source. And we're going to edit this data source. You may omit this, this message. What we're going to do here is that we're going to create a user expression, a user calculated field. In this case, we are going to use a simple calc where the username is differentmarble@gmail.com. We are going to filter the information to the country Colombia, okay? And then what we can do is to add this expression to the data source filters and use the true value. What is interesting about publishing data flows with Tableau Prep or Tableau Prep Conductor is that when you publish the first time, you are going to have the metadata. The metadata is where you will find the hierarchies, the calculated fields, the data source filters, and also you have the extract information. The second time you refresh the data source, Tableau will not modify the metadata info. Instead, it will modify the extract. Okay, so it is really interesting that the metadata will remain while the extract will be changed. Okay, so finally, what we're going to see is, in this case, I have a Tableau Pulse metric here. And for example, for the last month, the admin user has 3,200 sessions. For this is a Google Analytics data source. What is really interesting is, as I said before, that the Pulse metrics will respect the data source filter. And you see that here, in this case, for country Colombia, you will have 452 sessions. So it is really interesting about this because we have two tips here. The first one is how to edit the data source filters for Tableau published data source from a flow, and also that Tableau's tools will respect the user filters. So let's go back to you, Jim.
That's great. We're seeing more and more questions about Tableau Pulse. Okay, let's take a look at this question here. This came in from this type of question we get on a weekly basis. This particular question came in from somebody who happened to be an HR executive. He worked in human resources. And what he had is he had a data set and he had a number of job requisitions that were open, and he had the open date for the requisition. And then he had the filled date, and some of the jobs weren't filled yet. And his question was, how can I create a chart where I can look at each month and I can count the number of open recs and the number of filled requisitions? And like I said, we see this question in some form every week, and it's known as the two-date problem. It's a classic problem for in Tableau. His starting point, the data that he started with, looked something like this. He had a rec number and some reference on what the position was. And then he had a starting date and he had an end date, and he was trying to get these dates to line up. And what he didn't really understand was that those two dates are independent dimensions. They don't exist on a common calendar. There is no common calendar resident inside Tableau when those two dates exist. So what we had to do is we had to make them a calendar. We just simply created a calendar using an Excel spreadsheet. I used the first date of each month for the year 2020 in this example. And we came back in and joined that to his original data set using a Cartesian join. And a Cartesian join allows us, and I'm going to open this up so you can see the join. This Cartesian join allows us to connect each record in his primary data set with every record in the scaffold or every month starting date. And all we did here to create this join was create a join clause using a one in his primary data set. And we did the same thing in the scaffold data set. Just created that join clause. And that's all we needed to do to connect those two data sets. And now every record in this data set is connected with every record in that data set. So when we come back and we take a look at the data now, and we're able to work with that data, we're going to use the scaffold date in our calculations. And we can see by the scaffold date, we see the months of the scaffold dating. We have each one of his positions there, and we can see using a very simple calculation. And I like to use this use an LOD for this. Not that it's totally necessary, but in his case, he was doing some other things and he needed it. All this does is it checks to see if the month of the job fill date is the month of the scaffold date. And if it is, it returns a value of 1, and if not, it returns a 0. And we take a look at whether the job is still open, and that's just a little more involved. We just check to see that the fill date is between the close date and the open date, or the job is not yet filled, and we'll record a 1 when the job is not yet filled. We take a look at those values that are still open here. This is open in October, and it's not filled yet, so it's still open in October, November, and December, and it would go on. Once we do that, we can take a look at it. I just created a very simple chart here that shows the open date, or the jobs that are still open versus the jobs that have been filled. Now, the important thing to realize here is that he had 2 dates, and he thought that, they're on the same calendar, so I can just join and connect them together. But you really can't do that. There is no common calendar. You have to use a scaffold to create a common calendar. Diego, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. It is a really, really interesting case because today problems are so frequent, like hiring, firing, active and inactive. So it is really, really a good use case. In this case, we're going to take a look at my second question. It is about how to use a categorical column with also a sequential column. Okay? So the basic case of colors is dimension and dimension, but in this case, we are going to try to do one with categorical and sequential column. Okay? What we have is the typical case where we have a sequential color, but we want to give it a special color for the gradient of the XG plus and a special color for the KN gradient color. So we are going to, let's do this, okay? So we start with the initial case. What we are going to do is to create some placeholders. In this case, I like to use the placeholders as dimensions, and I will also like to create a double axis, okay? We're going to use bar type. What we are going to do here is that we are going to edit the axis from 0 to 1. Also, we are going to create a dual axis. We are going to synchronize axis. Okay. So what we are doing here is to replicate the heat map, but with a bar chart, okay? In the second step, we're going to remove the calculated fields here and here, and we're going to add our dimension to the column. Okay, but at this moment, it seems that I have not done anything. So what is happening? Okay, at this moment we have 2 layers, one for the categorical color and one for the sequential color, but we have the sequential color in the upper part, and in the bottom one we have the categorical color. So what we're going to use is to add some transparency, reducing opacity, and voila. Here we have. So what we're doing, as I said, 2 layers, one for the categorical and one for the sequential. It is important to use in the sequential color, black sequential color, white, black. so the colors don't get modified. So let's go back to you, Jim.
There you go. I love that solution. We see people come in and, they're trying to force Tableau to do something it really doesn't want to do. And you just step outside the box and look from outside and say, well, what's a different way of doing this? And by layering two different solutions, one on top of the other, you were able to come up with that.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, a very interesting way to do this. Okay, this problem came to us by a very experienced user. It's a lady that I've known for doing virtually for quite some time. And it came in, of course, on a late Friday afternoon. And she said, I got this real problem. And I'm going to show you some Superstore data, but my real data kind of looks like this. And she says, when I filter this data, all of a sudden, some of these 17 categories or 17 subcategories are disappearing. You see, I don't know what's happening. And on top of that, I don't know how to fix it. And we're going to call her Sue because that's her name. And maybe it's just easier to show you what was going on. And you've experienced this problem maybe in a little different way. Sue was using what are called small multiples to take a look at all 17 categories at the same time. And what she found is when we filtered down, we're going to filter down for just the month of February. And instead of seeing 17 categories, she's only seeing 13 categories. And the question was, well, why does that happen? And what do I do about it? Well, what's happened is she's hit a void or a null in the data set. There is no record for the combination of like bookcases and for the year February 2020. There's no record. There's no data. So when Tableau goes to look for that data, there's nothing there that returns a null. Now, you've probably seen it without the small multiples, where all of a sudden you fill and the whole screen goes blank. Same problem. Now, the solution to that is, once again, to using scaffold. It's a different example of using a scaffold. And for this one, I use Tableau Prep to create the scaffold. You could do this in Excel or you could do it in Tableau directly, but I use Prep here. And all I did was take a look at the scaffold date, which were each of the dates that she was looking at, and the subcategories, and use the Cartesian join to join and join those back to the older date. And once we have done that, granted, it's going to explode the data. I mean, you can see that we're looking at a lot of data now, 30,000 records. But once we have done that, we can come back to that data set. And now we have a record, a real record in the data set for each one of those combinations of date and subcategory. And we can go into that data set and we can drop a ZN, zero null expression into that data set. And when we do that, we now get all 17 categories, although some of them, like bookcases, envelopes, and copiers of machines, have no data, but we were able to drop a 0 into that data set. And very often we'll see this question come up. They'll say, oh, the screen went blank, and all I want to see is 0. Well, this is how you go about doing it. And you can see looking at the data itself, you can see what we've done. These are the 17 categories that I filtered it for that same date. And you can see here, using the CN sales, we're able to drop a 0 into those subcategories. Diego, back to you.
Thank you, James. That's a really interesting question also, because there are so many people that ask, how to show 0 if I don't have a record? That's a very common question also. Okay, this one is a really interesting question. Probably is not so famous as the ones that probably Jim has already done, but this is really interesting, and it's how to restrict the filter option. So basically, this guy provided us with an example of what he wanted to achieve. Yeah. In this case, he has a parameter, and he has some product containers, and he would like to filter on jumbo box, jumbo drum, large box, but he wanted this to be multi-selection. Okay, he has done this with a parameter, but okay, it is not so simple to change the parameters. As you know, parameters are single selection, so we have to do another technique. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is to create a fake field. In this case, what we are doing is just if the product containers is in the three categories that we want to remain to keep, we are going to use the product containers. And if they don't belong to this small set, we are going to use the old value. Okay. So it's really simple. We are just keeping the name for these three options, and for the other ones, we are using all. Okay. We created this fake field for the only purpose of creating a set. We're not going to use it for anymore, okay? And as you see here, we have like a filter control. It will be a set control, but we have a multi-selection option, okay? Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is to create an expression to filter the options that we have in our fake field set. So if we have the old value in the fake field set, then we are going to use that. We are going to show all the records. And if that is not the case, we are going to look if the product containers is in our fake field set. If it does, then we are going to show the value. Anything else, we are going to hide those values. We are going to filter them out, okay? So in this case, we are going to add our filter. We are going to use the true value. And we are going to show the set control, okay? So finally, we have here something like if we uncheck the old value, we keep with the three values. If we uncheck or filter out jumbo drum, we keep the values. And if we check all the options, we have all the information. So this way we reduce the number of options that we have in our filter control. That really is a set control. So really interesting. Go back to you, Jim.
That's a wonderful example of using sets, and sets are so often users don't think about using sets. The Diego is very good at using sets, and here's something that an example of how you can use them and where you can use them to save a lot of time and effort and get to a solution that you couldn't get to otherwise. This example is relatively recent. We had a user come in. He said, hey, look, I'm very experienced using sheet swapping. I know how to do sheet swapping. But I've got a problem. I've got 3 data sets that I'm bringing into Tableau. Each data set has its data and its own set of filters. And I can bring them into Tableau, and I have no trouble at all doing a sheet swap for the data itself. You know, I can set up a parameter, and I can do the sheet swap for the data, but I can't do it for the filters. If all the filters appear all the time on the dashboard, and that's not what I want. I want the filters only that pertain to the data set. Well, in sheet swapping, traditional sheet swapping, that was a limitation. It's very difficult to make Tableau actually make an individual item disappear. Well, that was before what's called dynamic zone visibility. Dynamic zone visibility was introduced in 2023, and it is one of my absolute favorite features. I use it quite often because it allows you to fill or hide objects on the dashboard, individual elements on the dashboard. And there's 3 things you need to do. We just identify what that element is, and we're going to show you how to do that. And it could be a worksheet, it could be a filter, it could be a container that contains other containers or contains multiple worksheets. We just identify what it is. We set up, it's known as a Boolean trigger, just an expression that returns either a true or a false. And we use that to control the visibility of that item. When the trigger is true, the item will be visible. When it's false, it will not be visible. And then we do a setup on the layout of the dashboard. I'm going to show you some of his data. He had 3 data sets. So I'm only going to show you one of them. It all works the same way. This data set was HR data, and it had two filters. You got an education you had. First thing we had to do was set up a parameter. And you had a parameter set up, but I went back in and changed the parameter a little bit so that it looked like this. It's just a string parameter, and it had three values. You had a data set called Superstore, one called HR, and one called Finance. And I set that up as just a straight string parameter. And then for each one of the Boolean triggers, one for each one of the data sheets, we set up a separate trigger. And this one just says, hey, if the parameter value is HR, return a true. And that's what we need. We need a true or a false. And we did the same sort of thing on a Superstore data set. And when you look at it, it's just if that parameter equals Superstore, return a true, otherwise return a false. We did the same on the financial. We created three buttons because we're going to use a parameter action to change the value of that filter. And in creating the buttons, all we've done is we've taken a look at Superstore, HR, and Finance, brought that all together on a dashboard. Well, first, let's take a look at the parameter action, because we actually used three parameter actions. You had three separate data sheets, and data's coming off of the three sheets. So we had to have a parameter action that connected each of the sheets. And all this does is it takes a look at the button, and it says whatever button you select, drop the value of that into the parameter. And on the one data sheet, it goes to the Superstore data, the HR data, or the finance data. Now, the real magic happens when we take a look at the layout tab, and I'm going to go up here on the layout tab. We're going to start by looking at, I've created a container here that includes, and I want you to see what this container looks like. I'm just opening these tabs up here. This container that we're looking at right now includes all three of those data sets. Okay, all three of them are in there, and it contains an additional vertical container. And in that vertical container, I've dropped in all of the filters that he'll have on each one of the individual sheets. So we've got a container inside, we've got this container inside a container, and this container over here has all the filters, and this container has the three data sheets. Then for each one of the data sheets inside the filter, I've got the visibility of that is controlled by the dynamic visibility zone. So for the Superstore data set, I've got a control here in the identify the Boolean trigger we set up. That's the trigger we showed you before, and this is going to return a true when Superstore is selected. For the HR data set, okay. Okay. For the HR data set, we're going to look over at the HR data set, and for the finance data set, we're going to look at the finance data set. Now, the real magic happens over here while we take a look at each one of these individual filters. Each filter has the same Boolean trigger. So when we look at the HR data set, there are two filters that need to be filtered, need to be seen, the education filter and the department filter, and each one of those are triggered by the same HR filter. Down here, see, this is filtered by has the same Boolean trigger. We look at the finance data set. Okay, we can see that each of its filters are triggered by the finance Boolean, and so on. So now when we select a value, we select what data sheet we want to see. We not only see the data sheet correctly, but we also see only the filters that apply to that data sheet, which was accomplishing his goal. This was something that was very difficult to do with traditional sheet swapping. The dynamic visibility zone, dynamic zone visibility has made it very easy. And like I said, it's one of my favorite new features. I use it on many occasions. Diego, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. This is also one of my favorite features. It is really, really, really cool that you have bring this example to all of us. Okay. In this case, we have, well, it was an interesting question when you have a background image and some floating elements. Well, the problem here is that when you have different sizes of screens, you will see probably some white bands here on the left or in the right. Or if you modify the size, well, you have some bands in the top and in the bottom. Well, this guy is asking, okay, what can we do to have a responsive background? Yep. And it is so interesting. So we're going to see our solution. Solution is basically that we have to use a map background image. Map background image let you to resize the image. It is so wonderful to use for some creators of Tableau Public workbooks that also creates so wonderful workbooks, but they have to use fixed size because they don't know this trick. I'll show you basically what we have done. We have done is to create X field with the number of pixels of the width of the image, and an X and a Y field with the number of pixels of the height of the image. Yeah. Then what we have done is go to map background images. Then we go to our data source. In this case is Q8. What we have done is to create a map background image using the X field and the Y field using the size of our image. And also what is really important here is to uncheck the log aspect ratio option and also check the always show entire image option. Okay. Finally, we can hide the headers. And what we need here is we have this situation. We are going to remove our background image and we are going to introduce our map background image. Finally, we are going to hide the title. We are going to readjust a little bit the elements. Okay. And what is really interesting is that when the image in the background is responsive, also the floating elements are responsive. So it is really nice to say that Tableau is not the person to blame. So it is really interesting that we have this type of responsiveness with our map background image. So, Jim, get back to you.
I learned something new today. I didn't know. I didn't know how to do that either. It's a very good solution. It's the type of thing that we see come up once in a while, but I had no idea how to do it. This last question I wanted to go into because we see this 20, 30 times a day, and we see it with all types of users, new users as well as very experienced users. And you say, well, if it's such a simple question, why are we spending time on it? It's just simply we take a look. We say you cannot mix aggregates and non-aggregates, and I wanted to spend just a moment and talk to you about what that error really is. Just taking a look at some Superstore data here. And I've just filtered Superstore data for furniture, and I wanted to calculate an average selling price. And in calculating the average selling price, I took the sum of sales and divided it by quantity. Sure enough, we get this error message that comes up that says you can't mix aggregates with non-aggregates. Well, all Tableau is saying to us, and I'm going to go up to the analysis tab here and open up the analysis tab to view the data for this particular worksheet. All it's saying is that, look, this view has 12 rows of data in it. And that's pivoted will get you to 12 rows of data. And the data that underlies that has 2,200 rows of data in it. And all this error message is telling us is it's saying, Jim, you got 12 rows of data, you got 2,200 rows of data. How do you want to get the 2,200 rows to match up with the 12 rows? What are you going to use to aggregate? And here we're going to use sum, and it's going to calculate our average selling price. Okay, no problem doing that. What gets interesting is as we go a little deeper to a more advanced example, and these are the types of things that Diego and I see all the time. This user came in, he had an if statement, he wrote an if statement, he says, look, I've got a dimension that's a string dimension, and I've got a second dimension segment that's also a string dimension, and I've got this set up where I'm doing this right, type equals current year actual or segment equals tax. Then I've got the sum of the total and the sum here. So that's aggregated. And I tried to use ATTR as on type and on segment, and it didn't work. Now, very often users will come out and they'll say, well, I did this and I got an aggregation error, and we'll get an answer that says, oh, just wrap it in ATTR and it'll work. Well, that doesn't necessarily. The first thing we had to do, because this user did not send us the data, did not include his Excel workbook, which we, and Diego and I both desperately, is I had to translate that to Superstore data so we had something that we could look at. And all I'm going to look at is the year of the order date in Categorical furniture. And this is the equivalent of what he wrote. And you can see that, no, that doesn't work. Well, we can go in and fix the syntax. And this is what he tried to do. He went in and he said, I've got the year of the order date. Well, I'm going to wrap that at ATTR. And now I've got the year of this max date. And I'm going to use ATTR on the category. And that's going to work. I no longer have an error, so I must be getting an answer. And the answer he got looked like this. And I'm just going to pull off sales and quantity here so that you can see what he got. He got back nulls. He didn't get any data back. Well, he got the syntax error corrected, but he didn't get the logic correct. And what we had to do was correct his logic, and to correct his logic was I went in and I looked at these two categories, and all I looked at was the category and the order date, and if the year of the order date equals the max year of the order date using this LOD, and the category equals furniture inside the LOD, record the sales, and then record the quantity for the denominator. And when we apply that to the data, we get the value that he was looking for at the max year in the furniture category. I like using LODs for this because we can go back and I can use that same expression anywhere. We can use it in a summary table. We can use it as a label. Use it as a variety of things. Diego, back to you for your last one.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, this is a really interesting question. Well, this guy has created a dimension using a case. So when he changed the dimension, for example, for chip mode, then he get the chip mode. When you use segment, you have the segment. And he created a filter using this calculated dimension. What is really interesting here is that when he filters out some of these values and you change to chip mode, for example, you get nothing here. So it's really interesting. Well, let's see how we are going to solve this one, okay? So, in this case, I'm going to create a parameter selector. I'm going to change here my data source, okay? I'm using this technique that is frequently used in the Iron Beast competitions. What this is allowing me is to create some fake names for the measure names. So it's a really, really interesting technique. As you will see, I'm going to use measure names. So, as you see, well, we have squares, And we're going to remove the labels. And as you see, the measure names are segment and chip mode. But as you notice, we have segment and chip mode also here, but we are using them as measures. So it is really interesting way to create some fake names without interfering with the ones you have already in your data pane. Okay, so what I have done is to create a parameter selector. In this case, what I'm going to do is to create a dashboard action. In this case, we're going to change the parameter. We're going to use the parameter selector. We are going to choose the dimension. We are going to use the source field select, keep current value. Wonderful. And what we have done to this moment is that we are going to change the value of the parameter. Next, what we're going to do is to create an action to preset the values. In this case, we're going to create this filter action. This case, we're going to use from the parameter selector to the sheet where we have the dimension. And it is really interesting here. We are going to select fields and we are going to use the dimension field. As you see, we have a warning here. Don't worry, this is how it works. Wow. I probably missed something in my head. So we're going to change to select and to show all values. Okay, wonderful. So in this case, we have the parameter, for example, or chip mode. And if we remove some of them and then we select the other, you will notice that the filter will be reset. So that's very interesting. We are using two techniques, the parameter selector and also how to preset a filter. So it is wonderful to use.
Well, we had a lot of fun today. I hope everybody else had a lot of fun today. We have a very little time for questions, but you can stop us in the hallway or you can come over to Data Village. And if you see Diego and I and you have questions, by all means, come up to us. We'd love to spend some time talking with you. There's also a survey that we'd ask you to fill out and tell everybody how much you enjoyed this presentation. And if there is a second presentation tomorrow morning, we're doing the same presentation together. If you'd like to come and see us. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for showing up.